All right, welcome to Friday's transportation seminar at Portland State University. I'm Dr. Kelly Clifton, a professor in civil engineering here, and I co-host the seminar this term with Dr. Li-Ming Wang from the Urban Studies and Planning Department. Today's guest lecturer is Jessica Berry. She is a regional planner from San Luis Obispo Council of Governments, and she's going to talk today about some of her multimodal performance measures they've been developing there and how they're being applied in practice. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. My name, again, is Jessica Berry. I am currently with the San Luis Obispo Council of Governments in San Luis Obispo, California. Has anyone been to San Luis Obispo? Anyone here? Yeah, good. It's a great city. I love it there. It's a town, great small town, and it's a great place to have to be working right now. There's a lot going on with the regional agency and with transportation. So I'm going to talk a bit more about the US 101 Corridor Mobility Master Plan. This was a project that SLOCOG did over the course of about a year and a half. We actually hired Kittleson to do they were the lead consultant on this project, and I'll get into a little more detail about what they did for us with this. But this was our first real foray into performance measurement, using performance measures to make planning and programming decisions in a really comprehensive way. So a little bit about me and San Luis Obispo. San Luis Obispo is a city of about 47,000 people right now. It's in a county that has approximately 270,000 people and a very active group of bicyclists and transportation activities. I've lived there for 10 years. I started out as the bike coordinator for SLO Regional Rideshare, which is part of SLOCOG now. I was hired to put on Bike Month events and start a Safe Routes to School program and do a variety of other outreach activities. And I started doing that while I was getting my master's. Originally started my master's in public policy and then discovered that planning was a thing and that transportation planning was something that people did, and I got really excited about it. So I switched over to planning as a master's, city and regional planning. I was also on the board of the Bike Coalition during that time. So I did those things for a few years, transferred over to our transit division, and then after I graduated with my master's degree, I started working in our programming and project delivery division, surface transportation. So I was focused primarily on working with our local agencies to fund and build projects that ranged from interchanges to bike facilities to separated bike paths, a variety of different activities that I'll get into with the slide that I have about SLOCOG. But that's kind of the trajectory I've been on. I've been working at SLOCOG for 9 years, and I'm actually moving up to the Portland area next month. So I'm going to start working at Multnomah County. So this is kind of one of the last things I'm doing for SLOCOG. It's pretty exciting. And this has been a great project to work on. So a little bit about SLOCOG. We are kind of like what Metro is. We're a regional transportation planning agency and a metropolitan planning organization. So we get money from the state and the federal government, and our board is made up of all of the county supervisors and a representative from each of our incorporated cities, and we fund and deliver regional transportation projects. It's much smaller. This is a much smaller level than what Metro is, and it has a lot fewer functions as well. But that's our primary focus is on that. In the greater scheme of California, this is a slide that, okay, let's see. SLOCOG is right here. One of the things that's nice, that has been nice at an agency like ours, is that we are actually the same size and shape as our county. So we have, so like I said, our board is made up of all the supervisors and representatives from each of the incorporated cities. We are an RTPA and an MPO together, instead of some agencies you'll see have, there'll be several RTPAs that are part of a larger MPO, for instance. But it makes the way that we do work very comprehensive and also on a smaller scale that's real manageable for our board members. And then this is kind of the breakout. As I said, we're the county, and these are all of our incorporated cities. There's 7 of them. In my role, I work with the central and southern part of the county. So I work with the city of San Luis Obispo, Pismo Beach, Arroyo Grande, Grover Beach. Those are my cities that I work directly with to deliver products. As I said before, I started out over here in rideshare. So a lot of these activities I was very involved with. And then now I work over here in programming and project delivery. One of the things that has changed in the way that SLOCOG has been evolving over the last several years is we've been doing a lot more of our own long-range plans leading up to our regional transportation plan, which we actually just completed a couple months ago. So this project, the 101 Corridor Mobility Master Plan, the idea behind it was to really look at the full 70 miles of the corridor, figure out where the problem areas were, figure out what we, with our partners, figure out what we wanted to fund and what we wanted to actually put into our long-range plan for in the constrained list of projects, and what we wanted to, what areas that we wanted to focus on the corridor. So projects and also just overall the planning level. So we started out by looking for funding to do this. It was a long project that we worked through with our state partner, Caltrans, to identify the money that we could do to put this project together. We applied for and received a statewide partnership planning grant, which really tied us to working very closely with the state DOT to make sure that they were 100% on board. And of course, it's their facility. They own it. They operate it. We provide funding to do projects on it. So it was an effort to really work closely together to make sure that the project what we were developing is something that they wanted. And just the act of writing the scope of work for this grant probably took 2 or 3 months. It was a lot of discussion and a lot of really trying to make good, to build the partnerships up and be really working really well together and really closely. So we did receive the grant in about August, I believe, and let's see, 2013 now, August 2013. No, I think we received it earlier in the year, and that's about when we hired a consultant to start the work. We chose to hire Kittleson & Associates. We worked primarily with their Sacramento office, so I know they have an office here, but we worked mostly with their folks out of Sacramento. And their project manager on the project had been at SBCAG, which is Santa Barbara County Association of Governments, very similar to SLOCOG, had a lot of experience working on the 101 in Motion project, which was a project that was similar to what we were trying to do, but on a much larger scale. So he had good background and good experience. Jim Dankowicz is his name, and so we hired that team along with their sub-consultants, which included Wallace Group, which was local engineering firm in San Luis Obispo, Flint Strategies to do our public engagement, and Mark Thomas did the structures. So they, when I get into more details about the project, we'll talk about what their roles were in that. But again, our goal here was to figure out where the highest needs were on the corridor and what the most cost-effective improvements would be in that area, in those areas. So we did it in 3 phases. These are kind of a description of our outreach phases, but they also coincide with the kind of performance measures we used at each phase. So in phase 1, we did what we called our Tier 1 performance measures. So we looked at the full 70 miles, and we picked 12 performance measures that I'll get into to evaluate the corridor. At the same time, we developed a web tool where people could just put whatever they thought the problems were on the corridor. Anywhere you think there's a problem, what kind of problem you think it is, and why, people told us what they thought we should do to improve it or what they thought the problem was, and it was all over the map, literally. We also did intercept interviews at a bunch of farmers markets and at the fair and at some park and ride lots. We had 3 public workshops, and I went to 14 agency meetings with some interactive polling technology and asked questions to find out where, kind of similar to the questions that we asked, or kind of similar to the information we were getting on the website, what kind of problems do you think they are? Are they bike related? Are they congestion related? Are they, what do you think the problem is here? So those were the kinds of things that we did in the first phase. In the second phase, we looked at improvement concepts, and we used a different set of measures to figure out which improvements were the best for the corridor. And I'll talk about those in the slide. It's the measures of effectiveness that we use to evaluate each project and project concept. And we had another interactive web tool, where, which I'll show you. But that's where we asked people what they really, what they liked about an improvement or didn't like, or if they thought this improvement would solve something or not. So those kinds of questions. We also did more public workshops. Overall, I went to about 30 different public meetings to talk about this project. And we actually had some press about it. So I did a couple of interviews on the news about this study. And then in our final round, we worked really closely with our partners to pick which projects were the most valuable to the corridor to end up in our regional transportation plan, and most likely then to receive funding from us through our programming processes. So to move on to how we decided what kinds of things to focus on. There's different performance measurement frameworks to look at. What we used was Caltrans' Smart Mobility Framework. And when we did our request for proposals, we asked the consultant teams to each come up with what they thought would be sort of the framework to use for the performance measures, or just to suggest some other things. STARS is another framework that I believe comes out of the Portland area, Sustainable Transportation Rating System. So we looked at some of the consultant teams brought the STARS framework. The team that we chose used the Caltrans Smart Mobility Framework, which was sort of adopted by the state in 2010. We did that because we knew that there would be, that we were going to have them work with us. If we were already using a framework for performance measurement that we knew that the state liked, then we were going to have less of an uphill battle with the decision-making process. So the first thing we all had to do was sort of get on the same page about what's important to measure, what matters to us. And these came straight from the state. Project-related, when we looked at the corridor, is like location efficiency, and is it location-based? Is that something that's important to our community? Is environmental stewardship or social equity important to our community? And we just knew that by agreeing ahead of time to these measures that we would be sort of on the right track already. Now, this is a framework. Emissions reduction is a way of measuring something, but it doesn't get into the specific details of what we really wanted to measure, what we really care about. Multimodal safety is another example, or mode share. So what do we agree on? What kind of mode share are we trying to achieve? These are the things that we didn't have an exact answer for going into this. We just knew that the framework was something that we agreed upon. So what we had to do with our partners was sort of decide on what the measures were that we were going to use, what we decided to measure on the corridor to figure out where the problems were. And just as an example, so bicycle connectivity sounds like a great measurement or a great idea, but what do you use to measure that? How do we know if it's not connected? What we ended up using to measure bicycle connectivity was how far out of their way would a bicyclist have to go to get from one point to another point without using, if they had access to 101, if they could use the freeway corridor, if they could use the freeway to get there, and it was only 2 miles, but in order to get there on a bike, not on the freeway, it's going to take them 10 miles. Well, that's a lot worse. That's a not good connectivity for that bicyclist in that area. And there's actually one specific location on our corridor where that's a very large problem. We call it the Templeton to Atascadero connector, where bicyclists in one direction are allowed to use the freeway. So they can use the freeway shoulder to get to the next exit. But coming from the other direction, their out-of-direction travel is pretty substantial because they aren't able to use the freeway for that section. So that area, you'll see a spike on the corridor when I get to that. So these 12 measurements. We had several meetings with our stakeholders where we sat around and talked about what do you think is what's important? How important is level of service or mainline service or merge diverge? And we actually had to have a lot of discussion about whether or not the 101 corridor needs to have good bicycle connectivity or good pedestrian access or connectivity. And if we weren't making those too much of a priority for a highway facility, did we really want to focus some of our performance measures on that, or did we want to look at other things? What we found overall is that you can see with the emissions, safety, weave, merge, diverge, and mainline, those are all focused on how vehicles use that corridor, how vehicles use that mainline. So it's a little bit stacked already toward cars. And that's how we got our partners to, or how, especially our partner with the Department of Transportation, how they got comfortable with these 12 measures, because they were, some of them were, it was a little more weighted toward how the vehicles use 101, which is its primary function, and then how it affected people trying to cross US 101, for instance, if they were walking. Pedestrian connectivity, for example, we actually measured that by how many people lived, how close they were to a overcrossing. So how many overcrossings are there in an area, and how many per person? So how much access do people have to getting to the other side of 101? So those were the 12 measures that we looked at. This line above is actually our whole 70-mile corridor, starting at the Santa Barbara County line, going north to Monterey County line. And each of those lines that cross are different intersections. And you can see in some places it's not actually, it's just an exit off of one side. Stagecoach Road, for instance, right here, only has access. It's not a full interchange. It's actually an at-grade access point. So it may have more safety issues, for instance. So we still have some of those, actually, throughout our region. So keep that in mind, because the next several slides I'm going to show you are really based on this information. Santa Barbara to Monterey County, each of those are crossings throughout. And then down below, you can see the post-mile. So what we did is we took these 12 performance measures, and we put them on a 0 to 10 scale, and we looked at them across the full 70 miles. So as I mentioned before, we're actually looking at we're looking at each of the performance measures, each of the metrics, and how they scored on a 0 to 10 scale. So on a 0 to 10 scale, and keep in mind that some of these are actually continuous. It wasn't a 0 for this level. It was more of a continuous value. But in order to show that information to our board, we broke it out like this. Parallel roadway connectivity and level of service. We actually went in. Oh, good. We went back in. Originally, we started with information about accidents on our parallel routes or level of service at level of service at intersections. This was the first round of information. We used level of service at intersections to decide how this number 7, how this performed, this particular measure. Later, when we had our traffic model updated for when we had the traffic model done and we had existing and future conditions, we actually looked at level of service on the facility, not intersection movements. And then, so park and ride lot coverage. This is really, I really like this example because I didn't come up with this set of measures. Our consultants did. But it's a really great example of the level of detail that goes into a 0 to 10 score for something. They really took into consideration how the park and ride lot, what it offered to people. So number of spaces and whether or not there was bike parking and trash facilities and sidewalks and access to transit. And then if it was a really nice, a really well-functioning park and ride lot, and it was not close to another one, it got a different score. So they really thought about how the park and ride lot would function overall. So the idea here is that performance measures, everything can be measured in some way, but there's a great deal of assumptions and in the ways that we choose to measure things. So this park and ride lot in particular, I think, really tried to capture a lot of information about how that park and ride lot was functioning in order to decide how the score on 101 would come out. And as I mentioned, with the bicycle connectivity, we looked at how far out of the way people had to go. That's one way to measure it. There are other ways, but this is the way that we chose to measure it. And we asked our partners, all of the local agencies, and the state, the planners at Caltrans that we were working with, are you guys comfortable with this? This is an okay way to measure these things to make a decision. And they were on board with that. So what you see here is every mile of the corridor is on a 0 to, gets all of those 12 performance measures on a 0 to 10 scale for each mile. So anywhere where there's peaks, it's a little tricky because it's hard to tell what's going on at the top of the triangle. But this is an area where it's functioning, its mainline level of service is really poor. It's actually got a 10. It got a score of 10, which is the highest, the worst score. And then you see the same thing here with merge diverge. And so this is what you're seeing here is the areas with peaks got higher scores for each of these different measures. And so this was telling us where the biggest problem areas were. This was no surprise to us. This is in Pismo Beach, and it's right at the area where you see the ocean for the first time since San Francisco. And it's on a curve. And there's something the locals are really uncomfortable with, which is it appears to have an auxiliary lane that merges right before the off-ramp. And so it's not an auxiliary lane. They get very frustrated that it didn't get built as an auxiliary lane. So we were pretty sure that the public was going to say it was a problem, but it was also noteworthy that the data told us it was a problem. What you're seeing down here in the southern part of our county is this is bicycle connectivity, but it also says something about the parallel route connectivity, because if a bicyclist has to go really far out of the way when they're not on 101, so does a vehicle. So, and we knew this already. We knew that this was a problem in that part of the county, that there aren't a lot of frontage systems adjacent to 101. So, and then some surprises, like the safety issues down here were much higher than maybe we expected. Safety's pretty small in most areas, but up here in the northern part of the county, it got a lot worse. And then this, we took all of the information that we had received. This is all our first round of public engagement process. Our first round of outreach, we took all of the input that we got off of the website and from all of the surveys we did, and we categorized them ourselves into the types of issues that people were talking about. We didn't ask them if they thought there was a merge-diverge problem. We just then put that in that category if they were kind of expressing that was their problem. And then we color-coded it to match what we did on the technical side. And it's kind of similar. It's more similar than I expected to see, which is pretty awesome. This next one is just the outline. This is just the line. This is number of comments we received. So the last slide, you saw it all broken out in color, and here's just overall, this is the line of public input. And then that is the line of public input imposed over the technical data. So it's a really nice thing when you go out and you ask the public what the problem is, and you do a technical analysis on what the problem is, and they kind of match. Is great. It was so great to go back out to the public and say, oh my God, you guys, you were totally right about where the problems are. So this is the line showing you where the public thought there was a problem. And then this is as you know, you saw the slide before, this is the technical information of where the problem areas actually were. These orange columns are what I'll get into next. These were the areas we decided to focus on. We called these our focus study segments. Because we really couldn't do the level of analysis we did for the whole corridor. We had to really focus in on some areas where the biggest problems were. This area is by far the biggest problem in our county. This is, sorry, I kind of pointed that out incorrectly before. This is actually Spyglass Drive. This is where that merge problem that locals have. That's where that problem is. So It's spiking there because they see that as a problem. Our technical data told us it wasn't as big of a problem as they felt like it was. It does spike here. So it is a merge-diverge issue, but it's not nearly at the, it doesn't reflect quite as cleanly as these other things do where the problems are. This one is similar. This is actually a peak hour problem at an off-ramp that gets backed up onto the freeway. But the good news was we could go back to the public and say, even though we're going to have to look at this some more to see what's really going on, but we're definitely going to look at it because we're going to focus through this whole area of the corridor. And then we modeled future conditions. This is our 2035 model of what the conditions will be on the corridor. You can see down here they get worse, but otherwise it's very similar to what we'd been seeing. So we wanted to make sure that that was true as we decided what to invest our dollars on in the future, because that's when this is going to happen. Are the problems still the same in the future? Are they in the same places? And they were. That was good for us to know. So what we did, those 4 orange columns that you saw are translated onto this map, where these are the areas that we did our next level of technical analysis on. And they are up in Paso Robles, through the city of Atascadero, through San Luis Obispo, and then through what we call the 5 cities, which is Pismo Beach and Arroyo Grande. We did have members of the public that live in areas outside of these were sometimes frustrated because they said, well, now you're just focusing on the cities. And they have a point there, but we really felt like the data was telling us these are where we need to look. These are really the problem areas. There are still some improvements we're going to end up looking at as an agency that are outside of these areas, and they are primarily focused on at-grade crossings where there's more safety concerns. So we'll still be working with Caltrans to sort of close up those problems, but we're really looking at where are we going to spend our regional dollars. Caltrans has some funding to work on those safety projects, so we chose to sort of keep our focus on the focus study segments. So overall, we narrowed down that full 70-mile corridor through our performance measurement analysis down to about 25 miles. And to say we just based this all on the data would be incorrect. We had a lot of meetings with our partners to talk about whether or not they were on board with these locations and why. And then we took it back to our board, and our board said, yes, move forward with your study like that. I don't expect you to be able to see this, really. I wanted to kind of focus more on the process that we used in this presentation than what the outcomes really were. But what we did next was in those 4 areas, we went through all of our planning documents as well as, so SLOCOG's regional transportation plan that had been completed before, our older version, 2010, and because a part of this was getting ready for our updated regional transportation plan. We looked through that, and we looked at the projects in there and the projects in our local agencies' planning documents to see what kinds of projects were already sort of brewing on the corridor to help us figure out where the problem, like we already knew the problem locations, but what were the kinds of specific locations and the specific solutions being identified. And what we did was we developed concepts. So we started out calling them alternatives. We actually had to work. This was scary for Caltrans because this is kind of getting ahead in the process. Basically, we were asking the public, and we were testing what kinds of improvements would work better than other ones. And we were doing it at a planning level or at a study level document. They weren't really comfortable with that because there's a lot of other factors involved in a decision making. It's not simply the one that improves on those 12 measures the best. And maybe a planning level document isn't exactly the right place to be making those choices, but we are required in our regional transportation plan to constrain projects. So we have to make our best guess about what those are going to look like. So for every location that we identified through our plan review, we came up with several improvement concepts. Roundabouts are one that is actually being looked at now regularly at the state DOT, that they're required now to do an intersection control evaluation, ICE, to test a roundabout at every location. But then all of the other alternatives that we tested, like a signal, well, you know, those were things that we had to kind of work through with our partners. Like, is it okay to test a signal there? You know, could we ask the public how they feel about a signal at that location or a roundabout? Because we wanted to gauge the public input, but we also were doing the technical analysis on these. And then this is kind of the slide that we had. This is what it looked like when you looked at it on the website. And you were able to, on the website, go hover over these improvements and see each of the concepts that we were evaluating, and say what you liked or didn't like and what you thought. Did you think it solved the problem or not? So it was kind of the same kind of test we did where we, in the first round, we asked the public and we tested it ourselves. And we did the same thing in the second round. And then for each of those improvements and the improvement concepts, we tested their measures of effectiveness, basically. We looked at how they improved the corridor or the experience on each of these measures. So did they reduce delay, or was there an emissions reduction, or a health savings, or a safety, I'm not seeing safety on here, but or crash reduction. Did it reduce crashes considerably, and how much did that impact the corridor? So we used all of these measures of effectiveness on each of the projects. So it kind of looks like when we were looking at a park and ride, we only looked at those two things. But we kind of tried to look at each project holistically and measure the performance of that particular project to improve that problem in the corridor. And then we monetized each of those benefits. So each of those ones you saw on the last slide. So, for instance, delay savings, which you see here. You see it in various places. We monetize that as a benefit. Delay is measured in person hours. So, again, each of these kinds of performance measures there's a lot of assumptions built into everything. Safety, as an example, is a cost per crash. Now, there's information out there nationally about what is the cost per crash, and what based on the type of crash that you see. And then there's local statistics that are slightly different. So we use data unique to San Luis Obispo County that said a certain kind of crash cost, has this kind of dollar effect, and it varies, and it's different in different places. So the better data you have at a local level, the better you can come up with these, the better assumptions you can build into how you measure something and how you monetize it. So all of these benefits were monetized in the way that you see over there. We didn't do, in this process, the second phase, we didn't do as good a job at educating our board, the SLOCOG board, about what each of these meant. With the cartogram that you saw, the diagram that showed how things were doing on the corridor, they were really comfortable with that, and they understood it really well by the time we asked them where to focus their resources. So they felt like they knew why we were choosing the places we chose. We moved through the benefits and the monetizing of the benefits fairly quickly, and they didn't get educated quite as easily along the way. So by the time we got to the next step, which was the benefit cost analysis, they were like, ooh, tell us again how you got to those numbers. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that. But that was the idea there, and what we learned in that process is that it's really important to get the buy-off at this level. Before you see what the projects are that we're going to spend our energy on and our time and money, we want our local partners, and our partners were pretty comfortable with it. Well, we want them, and we want the elected officials to be comfortable with the process we used to get to the decisions that we ended up making. So they were less clear about why we monetized the benefits the way we were, and we had to kind of stop where we were, back up, and then explain to them how these values were figured out. But this is the direction that they have to go. From here forward, our board is going to be asked to be making these decisions on a performance. We're moving into an era that is much more performance-based planning and project delivery, and we want to make sure that we're collecting good data now so that we can measure these things really well so that we make good decisions. So the next thing that we have to do, actually, starting this next fiscal year, is we have to look at our performance monitoring and how we're collecting data so that we have good data when we get to this point in the future. So then, and I don't expect you to be able to read this, this is where we had Wallace Group and Mark Thomas developing cost estimates for every one of those improvements. So again, we actually looked at about 140 different improvement concepts. So approximately 25 locations with different improvement options at each location. And they did a cost estimate for each one of those planning, or each one of those concepts. So for example, I'm not sure what I used here. Well, for example, we had them cost out an HOV lane and a general purpose lane, which are really the same cost, versus an auxiliary lane in the same location. So the problem here, we looked at 3 different solutions, and they costed out each of those solutions, and we developed a different benefit dollar value for each of those solutions as well. And then we ended up with our benefit cost ratio. So, and this was annualized project costs and benefits, so we looked over the time frame that we were talking about. And then this is kind of, we had this benefit cost ratio, but by the time we started showing people the benefit, and by people I mean our partners, so each of our local agencies that are on the corridor, there are 6 of them, and Caltrans and our Air Quality Control Board, by the time we started looking at the BC ratio, we were talking about specific projects. And when you start talking about specific projects, people get concerned about making sure their project is in it. So we looked at other things too. We wanted to make sure that we were looking at the benefit cost ratio, but some of those things that we may have left out of the benefit cost ratio, like overall community support for the project or the policy consistency, we kind of layered those on as part of our discussion. And then we came up with improvement packages. And then this slide, I just threw this in here because we kind of call this like the machine. This is the machine that we put every project through to see how it functions. So again, you saw these slides already, but we started with looking at the measures of effectiveness. Then we monetized those measures of effectiveness, those benefits. And then we did the costing of all the projects, and then we put them through the benefit cost ratio. And then we had a meeting with all of our partners, and that's what that picture is over there. And what's unfortunate about this picture is there were probably like 25 people in the room, and we literally went through every project, and we put it up on a map, and we put it up on the board, and we talked about it, and then we used our interactive technology to vote as a group. And our goal was to get everyone to agree with the package of improvements that we were going to put in each of those segments. And we didn't get to 100% agreement on any of them. But what we did was we voted and we saw, well, it's close. Does anyone want to talk about what the problem is or why they couldn't vote yes on that? Well, what would you agree to? How could we get you to agree to yes? So it was a really discussion-based process of really getting to the packages of improvements. And these are all staff. This group was made up of staff from each of the cities. And primarily it was planning and public works directors for each of those cities, plus our consultant team and SLOCOG and Caltrans, and then we also had our air district and our transit agency involved in the discussion. And so we came up with these packages of improvements together. And then SLOCOG took it to our board and said, this is what all of our partner agencies have agreed to. Not everybody's really excited about everything, but this is what we've agreed to overall. And what's nice about this group is that even though some of them may be from the northern part of the county, they weren't super concerned with what was going on in the southern part of the county, but we participated corridor-wide. So we asked them to really make good decisions for the whole corridor. And what we didn't do through this process is we didn't prioritize those 4 locations. We didn't say the #1 location is going to be Pismo Beach area. Our board did that for us. That was not the goal of the study, but that's what the board decided in the end. Is they said we want you to tell us what area do we need to focus really most of our energy on, and that was that's the Pismo Beach 5 cities area. We're actually working on a project for funding that right now. So in the end, these were the projects that we said, these are our priorities. on the 101 corridor. They're organized loosely by location, right? So this is focus study segment in the southern part of the county. This is the central county. This was the one that was farther north, and this was the northernmost one, which was also the shortest segment that we looked at. So it's not surprising that there's only one in there. And then out of that, many projects we decided to focus on countywide. And these are all park and ride. Well, you see ramp meters in here, but park and ride, TDM strategies overall, a van pool subsidy, and transit improvements ended up being things that were very cost effective based on the way that we did the benefit cost analysis. So they came out scoring really high. You can see this is actually ramp meters was one of the highest. But overall, the TDM strategies, because they're relatively low-cost strategies and the way that they were measured using a particular software showed them to have a very high value. So that was how we sort of came up with all of the improvements. These have then been, and this was all done on a relatively short time frame. We'd had about 1.5 years to do it, so we wanted to get it all done for our regional transportation plan. So the project itself wrapped up in December of last year, or October of last year. We actually finalized it. And then let's see, what did I include? Oh, so out of the first set of conversations we had with our partners, they said, we want to talk about reliability. Reliability was not one of the 12 performance measures that you saw at the beginning, but travel time reliability has become very important to the state of California, and they wanted us to look at reliability. So it wasn't really something that we had budgeted or had intended to do as part of the study, but our partners agreed that or our consultants agreed that they could do it on a region-wide level. So they were going to look at how each of these packages of improvements, when you put all of them on the corridor, did they improve the travel time reliability? So this was kind of a post-processing that we did. And this is just a little bit about why it's important. But it's a direction that we're moving for various reasons. It helps us manage the system better, so we're not just building a bigger system, but we're building a system that can function better more of the time. And it also, people really understand reliability. When they make a decision about how much time you have to build into getting downtown, I've noticed that, so I don't live here usually, but my family is here. And that the buffer time that my family builds into getting to downtown Portland is, it's on it. The other day, my sister and I came downtown at about 7 in the morning. We got downtown in 10 minutes. But she had built in a 40-minute trip time because she just doesn't know how long it's really going to take. So that's what we're trying to do with reliability is your system is reliable when a person knows that if it takes 10 minutes to get downtown, most days that they're going to build in a time frame that's not usually 30 hours. Like, that's a pretty unreliable system if you have to build in a 30-minute time frame to make sure you get downtown on time. I think she actually doesn't drive downtown that often, so she didn't really know how long it normally takes. But that's the idea, is like for people can make a decision at home how much time it takes for them to get somewhere. So it's kind of the time you save at home versus the time you spend sitting in your car on the road. So that's why we wanted to look at that. This talks about incidences of why the system is sometimes unreliable. The way that we did this is we actually, Kittleson, DigiWest, which is part of Kittleson, I think, put out BlueMac readers. So we used Bluetooth technology to figure out how long it took people to get through each point. And we put them up on either side of the focus study segments. This one is really interesting. So this is telling you about how long it takes for people to get through that one segment. This is a day where we had a fire alongside 101. And the speed, the time it took people to get, the time it took when they passed the first sensor to the next sensor increased dramatically. And this is what you're seeing here is their speed, overall the speed slowed down to almost 0. This is 20 miles an hour. And this is between 40, 60. So they're going, normally about 70, and then that fire happened and it took them a lot longer to get between those sensors, and that's what you're seeing. This one here, so another thing that factors into travel time reliability is weather. This might not be an issue in Portland. I don't know. Incidences of rain, incidences caused by rain. You know, that's what we see where we live because it doesn't really rain there at all. But when it does, it changes the way that, you know, how quickly people can move through the area. So if there's good frontage system, then they have more routes to use. Or if there's good incident management, how fast can you clear up the problem that's been caused there? So that's the way travel time changes. Let's see. So then again, these are the areas. These were our focus study segments that you saw on the map. This is the corridor overall. This is the buffer time that people are building in to their trip. Now this is for the whole corridor because we didn't really plan this as part of our study. So we just wanted to see how is it affecting the whole corridor from county line to county line. And that's what's important to Caltrans too, because they are really, you know, we are concerned with what's happening within our region, but they're concerned with how people are getting through our region on their facility. So that's what we looked at here. And this is what we were seeing, is that people had to build in a buffer time of 7.5 minutes corridor-wide in the southbound direction during the AM peak. And that's what these numbers are about. So AM peak, PM peak, in the southbound direction, overall functioning more poorly or less reliably than the northbound direction. And then we kind of looked in between, what was going on in between here, and we found that in the 5 cities area, it was less reliable in the northbound and the southbound direction. And same with the San Luis Obispo, but only during the AM peak. And then in Paso, it was AM and PM peak. And then they modeled what would happen in 2035. And the modeling that goes into travel time reliability, I could not possibly explain to you. It's very complex, and I did not participate in that. It was our consultants did that, and they did an amazing job. You factor in so many things, including weather. You have to factor in future weather. So what they found overall is that it became more unreliable. People had to create up to a 15% buffer time index in the 5 cities area. So it kind of matched what we were seeing through the other performance measures. And then then they did that. So they modeled the future without the improvements, and then they modeled the future with the improvements. Oh, this is actually more of a slide about how they did the future. So they were looking at how weather might factor in the future, et cetera. And then the areas that the travel time reliability, where it's less reliable, the areas of problem, which we knew, and was similar to the future. So as it says here, it matched what we saw from the performance measures that we did. Oh, and then, sorry, down here, so what happened at the end is then we took that information from the travel time reliability and we went back and we added it as a performance measure, or as a measure of effectiveness. We added it as a benefit, as a monetized benefit, and it actually increased the benefit cost ratio of the HOV lane pretty significantly in segments 1 and 2 because of the greater benefit of HOV lane over, for instance, general purpose lane. It really showed a much greater benefit based on adding reliability in as a performance measure. So it didn't change the way that it didn't change the projects that we had selected because we don't have the money to put in an HOV lane or a general purpose lane. We're still our board is still more on board with focusing on the auxiliary lanes and the other operational improvements at this time. So it didn't change the projects that we selected, but it reinforced what we thought was important using this new metric. And that is all. And this is just a view from the top of Cerro San Luis one morning. It's so gorgeous. I had to put it in there. So I'll take any questions. Thanks. Yes?
Questions, remember to say your name.
Indicating. I'm curious, what's the timeline on the construction for these projects?
Oh, such a long timeline. In our region, from our state transportation improvement program, we get approximately $6 million a year in interchange. In our region, costs about $40 million. So it's a long time frame. But oh gosh. You know, the lower cost improvements with the higher benefit, like the TDM, the Transportation Demand Management Program, ParkRide lots, ramp meters, those are all shorter time frame projects. what the 101 study told us is we really need to focus in the 5 cities area. So what we're doing right now is we're doing a project study report, which is the next step that you have to do before funding a project. It's kind of it's the state's programming document. That'll take us about a year to complete, and then we can put money on the project, which will probably be, well, we're looking at something really unique we're looking at a managed shoulder. So we were looking at widening to the inside that would be used some times of the day when congestion is really bad. So we're hoping that the state, because they really like that idea, they like that project idea, and it's super constricted in there. You can't really fit another general purpose lane. We're hoping they'll be able to move us through that process relatively quick, which would mean that SLOCOG could put money on that in the late fall of this fiscal year. But that means we would be putting money, or not, sorry, in the calendar year. We would put money on the next phase, which is environmental. Environmental might take like 4 years to complete. So we're looking way out in the future. I mean, optimistically, I guess I would say 2030 we might be doing something. It's just the planning. It just takes forever. Yes.
Both of us.
Yeah, sorry. I did look at both of you like at the same
Actually, my
time.
question came out of your response.
Oh.
Neil Heller. You mentioned a managed shoulder?
Uh-huh.
Okay. How does that work? How do you control access to that shoulder?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that would be part of what we would do next. It's also in the coastal zone. I can't imagine. We would have to manage it ideally where we've seen them work. They have a lot of signs, right? Big signs saying you can use it during this time of day and not during this time, and maybe there's something that automatically comes up to prevent people from using it when it's not allowed. I don't know how we'll get that through the Coastal Commission at all. And that's another level that we'll have to work through in the future. But in places where I think it's only been tested in one other place in California. That's why we're not sure how the state's going to respond to it. But they seem, at a local level, our district is very excited about it. They really like the idea. They really want to see it move forward, but we have no idea. Yeah.
Violet Brown. So you mentioned that this is a really long kind of planning process, and maybe I missed this, but so are there going to be stages where you kind of go back and do some of this assessment to see if there's still those priorities or if other things are more important?
That is a very good idea. We would do that ordinarily through when we do our regional transportation plan update. So as I said, this study was done for our 2014 RTP, which actually wasn't done until 2015. But the information from this study went into that document and said, these are our priorities, and this is what we can actually financially constrain in our 25-year plan. That plan will be updated in 4 years, and at that time, before those 4 years, they should be looking at this in a similar way, maybe adding some other performance measures that are more important to us because the policies change and politics change. But yeah, ideally they'll revisit this in 3 to 4 years to make sure that our priorities are still on board. Yes?
I have a bit of experience on the stormwater side of dealing with projects, actually for the Multnomah,
Okay.
similar to this. But I was going to ask, obviously it's still in process, but I know from my perspective there were a lot of things that after a meeting I would have decided that I wanted to improve on, or things that suddenly didn't make any sense that I had done. Is there anything that along the way that you suddenly decided we should have done it this way instead of that, or wish we could have improved it, kind of, take a step back and looked at things?
Yeah, I have to say the thing that I was most disappointed by was when the measures that we used for the multimodal improvements and the way that we calculated the benefits, it wasn't significant. We actually didn't end up with any improvements that were specifically bike or pedestrian related, which was very frustrating to our bike community. because the measures that we used weren't robust enough to actually show how they improved things. I mean, you could also say that, well, overall on a highway project or on a highway plan, you wouldn't expect to see a lot of improvements coming from the bike and ped projects, but we just really, they were low, and maybe we should have pulled them out and done them differently or made them much more robust because we didn't see a lot of benefit from them. Anything else? As I get to that, yes.
I have a question. You have top performance, and there are some in some sites, the score of one performance was improved, but because of this, the score of other performance was decreased. There are some cases like this.
So the performance of the project, because of the measures, some of them improved? Let me see. Yeah, sorry.
Because you want to improve the score of performance.
Yes.
And because you do some improvement. And because of this improvement, maybe other the score of performance decrease.
That's
some cases like this.
Right. We didn't test that, and we saw when we put the improvements on the corridor, we saw or when we put the projects on the corridor, we saw how they improved the corridor, but we didn't see, especially outside the focus study segment, we didn't look at how it might have affected that area. So an improvement within the focus study segment, like improving, like adding this managed shoulder within the 5 cities area, might have some negative consequences outside of the focus study segment, and we didn't look at that, and we didn't really have a way built into our study to look at that. And that actually was frustrating to our constituents that were outside of those areas. They were like, well, you're trying to improve throughput in the cities. What's going to happen as soon as they leave the city and they're in our county where we still have at-grade crossings? That's a problem. Is that going to answer your question? Yes.
So these multimodal performance measures are relatively new, and they certainly add a lot of complexity to the process. And so you mentioned a little bit about how some of the non-motorized measures might not be robust enough or not weighted enough to sort of really show up. So what would you do differently, or do you have some thoughts about what other measures might be better?
Well, it's a good question. What I would have liked to see happen is after we did this study to use this kind of process for the overall regional transportation plan, where we do include a lot more multimodal improvements that, and we do that because it's not just highway based, right? It's region wide. So I'd like to. It's a good question. What other measures should we be using? I don't know. I'd have to really build a more robust. I'd like to look at a variety of factors that we could use to sort of just look at to compare bike projects and pedestrian projects against themselves, one another, instead of against a highway project. Where, I mean, the benefit cost ratio. The goal there is to sort of level everything out. Because they tend to be lower cost improvements. But we're looking at a lot. We're looking at miles. We've recently done miles and miles of Class 1 or bike path planning, and we estimate that's going to be $1 to $1.5 million per mile to build. Those are just not going to. We're not going to see a real high number value on those by themselves, but they're still really important to our community, and they're good for our economy, and those were factors that we could have done, we could include better.
I guess we would implement multimodal performance measures, then have you develop a more comprehensive data collection?
Yeah, that's our next step. After that, I wrote a grant to try to improve that because we're not measuring it well. And because we're not measuring it well now, we can't predict how much better it's going to perform. So, yeah, but doing the study first kind of told us where our holes were. Yeah, it helped us start to figure that out.
Well, I think we're at the end of our time. So I'd like to thank you again for. And join us next week for our speakers, Luca Akar State University. Thank you.